I set up a company and it failed miserably, and I got a bill at the end of it. And it was my foray into the real world of business, and that this stuff really matters. And since then, we've had the privilege of working with 148 different companies, driving last year alone hundreds of millions in revenue. And the reason I can say hundreds of millions is because we track that in detail. We know what that split is for these businesses, for these organizations. And all that is to say, I'm not just making this up. I've got the battle scars to prove the stories to talk about what we're covering off here. And if you're here, it's largely because we've got a big challenge with tech, and that's that tech decisions have a huge impact. I've personally seen a lot of work, money, and hard team morale wasted on some of these bigger high leverage decisions. So really what we're talking about here for Tech Week is actually the tech that you use and the tech that you subscribe to can be some of the biggest decisions that you make as a marketing leader. And how you getting those decisions right can mean the world of difference. This is also a really fascinating time for tech, with AI putting pressure on these investment decisions and actually making them a lot less clean cut. And so if that's a question on people's radars, I'd love to talk more about that, but I'm not going to dive specifically into this AI side of things. Today, I built a web app using a bunch of prompts, and it literally blew my mind. It's a really interesting time around the tech that we use. But I do believe that the biggest challenge we have as marketers is that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And I think strategy is becoming, as execution gets sort of commoditized by AI, the actual focus that we have as marketing leaders is becoming the biggest decisions, is literally the highest point of leverage that we have. And so, the other really interesting thing, and I'm not going to go too much into this, but data story early on, we geeked out off low code, no code automation and all the stuff that we could build by being really scrappy and lean and fast. And we learned a ton, but we also got ourselves into a little bit of trouble. We automated out an entire job role. We've done some incredible stuff with this, with marketing tech, but at the flip side of that was we also had to unpick some of this tech. We had to go back and actually bring the businesses, do more change management. And as we might talk about at the end of this, that actually culture around experimentation, data, and learning might actually be the biggest opportunity there is today. If you get tech right, scale, profit margin, impact, and actually enjoying your work are all on the cards. So let's dive into how to do this. The first thing is you need a benchmark. Let me just jump back here, and great, Jackie, Grace, Nick, welcome. Thank you for jumping in the chat. Grateful for that. The solution: measure the business for a benchmark. If you do not have a business level benchmark, there is no possible way you can actually calculate return on investment. And then there's no way you can actually make a smart tech investment decision. Big words, I know. Let's go back to some really basic principles, some first principles, so to speak. There are only 3 ways that marketing tech can improve your organization, that can improve your marketing. Number 1 is marketing tech can help you do more of what you're doing. So right now, your marketing team you might have a marketing leader, a marketing exec, coordinator type thing, a marketing manager. It depends on your structure. And then you are creating content and you're pushing out a range of messages and through a range of different channels that you're operating. And all of that marketing effort has an output. And one of the biggest opportunities you have, the easiest and biggest opportunity you have right now, is literally going, how do we scale what we're doing? How do we take what is already working and do more of it? And this is incredible how often we see this. We analyze a business and we see this big spike in improvement. We say, hey, what happened here? And they say, oh, we ran a promotion, co-branded promotion. And they say, that's amazing. How come you didn't do it again? And they just go, oh, we just didn't want to spam our audience or something. But you think, well, you haven't done it in months. And it's incredible how often marketing teams do things that work, but they don't actually just think through this lens of how do we scale it up? How do we literally do more? Number 2 is do a better job of what you're doing. So we can use marketing tech to optimize. This is typically personalization. How do we get more personalized communication that creates a better experience, increases conversion rates? Number 3 is doing new things. Doing new things is hard. Testing and validating new channels, new partnerships, etc. This is hard. So the question from a strategy perspective is, have you started with number 1, and are you exhausting number 1? in tech, typically we love to get excited about new tech, and doing more of what you're doing is much less exciting. It's much less sexy. It's much less glamorous. And so, but this is that shiny magpie thing. As a marketing leader, it's not glamorous, but by simply sticking to your guns and going, how do we scale what is working? Have we really exhausted number one? Because number two and number three are a whole lot harder. A little side note, what this also does is this pushes you into a genuine constraint or a genuine bottleneck within your business that can actually help you diagnose a real issue as opposed to being distracted by a symptom, not the cause. Okay, there are only 4 ways marketing tech can grow a business. And this is where we're going to push into the measurement strategy. Those 4 ways that marketing technology, like this is actually really just, there's only 4 ways to grow a business. Get more customers, get them to spend more, get them to buy again, and lower your cost to serve. And so when you think about your investing in tech to scale, to increase your margin, really, this is actually what it boils down to. So in order to do a strong ROI case, it's got to come back to these 4 points of leverage, because these are literally the only points of leverage in a business. This comes from a Masters of Business Administration theory. So I'm just going to quickly check. We've got as well. Again, please do drop in questions as we go. I know I'm kind of whizzing through some of this. So the big question I have for you is, are you measuring these only 4 ways to grow your business? Do you know your cost to serve? Do you know your cost to acquire a customer, buy your product, buy your market, buy your segment? Do you know your repeat purchase rate? Do you know your lifetime value? These are big, hefty metrics, and all of these metrics, they need a trend line, and they often need to be alongside market data to understand how well this is performing. The catch is, if you don't have this data, it's going to be really hard to make a smart marketing tech investment decision. Typically, I don't want to labor on this, but typically we'd like to, when you talk about this as well, you want a quantitative metric and a qualitative metric. Probably the best example of this is the average order value. So for many of your organizations, if you simply put your prices up, it all goes straight to your bottom line. So if you can literally just put your price up by a small percentage, it increases your margin, it increases your profitability. Arguably one of the highest leverage activities you can do as a marketer, really underrated. But the catch is, you might increase that average order value, but if your customer satisfaction declines, you're going to have a lagging indicator that's going to decrease sales and revenue in time. So this is just as you're thinking about these metrics and how you measure these core metrics, and you might think, yeah, well, what if? And this is why we need to balance, and this is why we need to run this data alongside your market, etc. So what I want to do now is I want to give you 3 examples of how we use this type of data to literally create a return on investment business case. And I'd love it if you're literally weighing up a bit of a decision. It would be really cool to maybe chat to that specifically while we're on this webinar. If that's the case, feel free to just drop a little bit of context in the chat, and it'll be super cool to talk about it. So the first example I want to talk about is a website or a web app, and this is platform tech. Like if you're a marketer, I hope some of you are smiling right now because you know this feeling of being on a clunky old CMS and you want to update your website, you want to be able to make changes, but there's a big process. It's very slow. There's a number of different reasons you might want to upgrade your website platform as well as a design refresh. And so this example here, I literally pulled this out of a proposal for a partner that we work with. I've dummied some of the numbers, but these were literally the 5 things kind of in this business case. And this is I use this as an example here because there's a lot more we could talk about doing a web project or a web refresh kind of return on investment and the ways that we look at this. But here, this one, in this particular example, it's lumped together where we've said an outcome of refreshing this, optimizing this website and replatforming is speed of optimization, is actually the speed with which we can make changes, because we've got a big test, measure, learn culture with this particular client. But we've also, from a conversion rate optimization perspective, we've calculated that if we can increase that average order value, which we've calculated, and we calculated very quickly, this is dummy data from a client, but this is one of the ways that we can literally take revenue and an average order value, etc. There's, like I said, this is dummy data, but it allows us to simply go, cool, for this financial year, etc., what was the, like, it allows us to quickly calculate these core numbers. And I find a lot of marketing leaders have a spreadsheet or a Power BI type dashboard that actually often gives these core business metrics, cross-channel, omni-channel, and this is actually where you should be measuring um, your core points of leverage. You should know as a marketing leader your cost to acquire a customer, your lifetime value, your retention rates, your, if possible, your cost to serve, your cost to acquire a customer. And ideally, this would actually be broken out by specific channels so you can actually see how these are trending over time. Becomes super easy to graph. For our clients now, a lot of them, we've automated this in a tool called Rows, like a more of a digital spreadsheet. But this type of spreadsheet is just super underrated as a marketing leader. And this is what allows us to actually calculate a lot of what we're talking about here, to be able to actually know this was our median. Yeah, we chose to use a median, not an average, because of the way it fluctuates seasonally. And to actually understand those core metrics, and then to actually have a reasonable lift. And then so this is really interesting, thinking about those points of leverage around email through better landing page development. There's an SEO play behind this project. And again, we haven't, this one here, there's probably another table to be done that if we hit this increase, what's going to be the actual return on investment? So again, if you're going through a web project, please drop in the chat. I'd love to speak more to that. I've been a part of some massive web projects, 7-figure web projects, as well as through to small, really lean ones. And there's pros and cons of different ways to go about this. Next example I want to talk about is CRM and marketing automation. This is such a fascinating space where there's, like, as a marketer, it's so exciting to think about the personalization opportunities, the way we can enrich comms. And for a lot of organizations, the CRM ends up being the heart of your customer data. And as a marketer, I know that you empathize and you know and care about your customers. And so having that CRM be tight and having that CRM be accurate and allow you to actually take action is huge, because you might have this insight as a marketer, but if you can't then take that audience and send them a message or add them to a retargeting audience or whatever the action is, then that insight is literally useless. It's literally a distraction. If you're not able to take action, insight without action is a distraction. Oh, nice rhyme. Oh, anyway, this is a really fascinating one, because we've done a fair bit of marketing automation. But what we found is the implementation of these tools is really interesting. And again, I actually want to just show you an example of this calculator. So in this here, I'll just zoom up so you can see this a bit better. I've just made a really basic calculator. I was just noodling around before jumping on this call. What I want you to note here is the amount of assumptions that are made within this space. So we're going, cool, we predict that by doing a CRM marketing automation tool, we go, cool, we can run this automation, we could do pre-arrival, an upsell, referral, a win back. You've got all these, we could do a birthday email, you've got all these automations you'd love to run as a marketer. But the catch is, when you actually push into the numbers, you might go, okay, over 12 months, how big is that audience for that automation actually going to be? You might, some of your organizations have whoppingly huge databases, but the fact is, how many of them are you actually allowed to email? How many of you are actually not icy cold because they signed up 4 years ago through some whatever? When you actually clean and segment that list and think about an automation, and by the time you actually get to a actionable list size, how big is it? And then you might go, this is automated, so we might see a really high click-through rate. We've got some really super high open rates, even higher than that for some of our clients on triggered emails. Click-through rates, typically, I don't know what you're seeing, but let's just be moderate at a 14% click-through rate, at a conversion rate. Again, that's really high. And then at an average order value. And then over the space of a year, which is crazy, because this is the audience size over 12 months. Obviously, it depends on, wow, that's the cumulative audience. So then you're looking at $7,000. So this is wild. This is actually crazy. And so the reality is, for many of you, you might have more of like a 2% conversion rate. And all of a sudden that $7,000 drops to $3,000, or your average order value might not be that high. And all of a sudden you're going, whoa, this is brutal. The actual business case on some of the stuff is not what you might thought. And say you're doing a HubSpot type platform. Typically, some of these costs and these licenses can add up there, but an integration CRM is only valuable if you've got good, accurate data in there. And then within that, you've got the actual change management that needs to happen to keep that data accurate and on time. But where the business case gets interesting and where CRM is worth doing is the long-term play, in that the efficiency across multiple departments through operating and automating processes, because some of these automations might not be customer facing, they might be back-end processes. The ways you can leverage this tool to actually save costs, all of a sudden, this full-time employee, FTE, say you're on 100K and you're saving half the amount of time to doing some of the stuff manually, all of a sudden you can actually start to end up in a better position. Because if this is just one automation, you add in the other potential cases, and then you actually might start to get a more healthy case beyond, and also where it can take you for the future. But again, I want you to think about these assumptions and how do we validate them? Because there's some big bandy numbers. And as we just looked at, the difference between moving some of these numbers massively is just absolutely astronomical. And that makes it really scary, because you might be banking on a 5% conversion rate on your business case, but then you come in at 1 and all of a sudden you're going, man, we really need to know that. And if you don't already optimize for a customer journey like this and have this data and actually be testing this with what you can, investing in a big old CRM isn't going to do it. You need to be faithful with the system that you've got. You need to put it to work. And so with Data Story, often when we get a new client and they want to look to automate something, it's amazing how when you've got someone who's good in this space, you can actually take one system, export, take the other system, export, merge the databases, enrich it however you need to, re-import into an automation and test this flow out before you integrate these big systems. That pushes you to get legal sign off depending on your organization and the complexity of it. But this pushes you to actually validate some of these numbers. And so validate. There's a big business case here, but often we want the shiny, pretty CRM marketing automation tool. But in reality, the catch is it's hidden behind hard work of actually just validating and going, how do I validate this assumption that I have around this business case? Is this actually going to save this much time? How do I prove this? And this is really interesting as you think about, hey, Christina, just saw you. As you think about these big investment decisions, can you just note how different this posture is? Like when I've been a part of some of these more like SLT type leadership conversations, it's amazing how we quickly move out of wanting to validate assumptions, because it feels better to sit in the boardroom and to make big decisions around moving forward and doing cool stuff with tech, when in reality, doing this hard work of actually validating what are our assumptions, what are our biases, get ChatGPT open, have a conversation. Hey, what are my biases here? This is my business case. Keeping this process and this posture of validation is just absolutely critical. Now I'm going to jump back to my slide deck. Christina, you'd asked a question. What has your experience been in understanding tools that companies already have, like Brevo, Monday, etc.? Fantastic question, Christina. So say marketing automation like Brevo, Monday, and probably more project management. Typically, it's a really good question. Like your current marketing tech stack is also worth, and this is where the business case comes in, because you're going, this is the current cost of the tech and this is the current output. And if we swap to this, what is going to be that space? And so there's spaces where often I find different teams love different tools and changing a tool is really hard. So but I'm a fan of the puppy dog clothes. Just take it home for a night. Just take the puppy home for a night, see if you like it, and then evolve it. And so that's a bit of an MVP where you might have a tool and you're going, man, if we just switch to this other tool, we get all this functionality. It's going to save us this time. It's going to run these automations. I want to sign up. I want to switch from X to Y. That exact case, though, is where it gets really interesting, because it's actually full of assumptions, where we've seen this heaps, where you go on the marketing site for a tech tool and it promises it can do everything and the grass is always greener, and then you sign up for that tool and before long you've moved one constraint to another and you haven't actually got the numbers like we just talked about in that business case to move it forward. And so this is why I think, because it's really interesting, because Data Story is kind of tool agnostic. Like we're an Active Campaign partner, we're a HubSpot partner, we're a Klaviyo partner, we work in a whole bunch of different tools, and we know there's pros and cons of these different tools, but they all have their limitations. And what we're finding is like you've kind of got to choose the lesser of two evils in this type of business case scenario. But often the answer is not that clean cut. One thing I haven't talked about here, which is probably worth noting, why, especially on the CRM marketing automation space, is this idea of let your limitations drive creativity. So let me give you an example. You've got this hypothesis. If we personalize this email, I'm trying to think, we've got some very varying industries here. But we've got this hypothesis that if customer orders a certain type of wine, if we personalize that email by the type of wine that they like, we're likely to have a higher engagement rate, a higher sign-up rate, higher conversion, like higher purchase rate. That's our hypothesis. But the catch is, one, can we validate that? Can we get that data, export it, import it, and manually run that and actually check if that conversion rate increases and by how much? And does that conversion and actually, by the time you run through those numbers, the business case of that integration, what is the value of that personalization? And then when we get really creative though, what about a really funny subject line addressing the different types of how different people like different types of wine? I'm just spitballing here. But could you use a more creative headline, a more creative subject line, to get that open rate and actually display all the types of wine? Because again, we've made that assumption that personalization will drive thing, but they might have just been having a rosé day, but really they love a red. And so this is where it's really fascinating, by actually still having all the products in the email might have a high conversion rate. So this is where this particular space of going, how do we creatively validate this? One, can we manually do the personalization? But two, can we actually use creativity to lift performance or brand type engagement as opposed to just the value of that personalized data? I hope that answers the question, Christina. It's a hard question, but keep it coming. You know I love it. Paid media. I'm not actually going to talk a huge amount about paid media, because for that, we've got to talk about the customer journey and the goal of what your paid media is doing. Is your paid media creating awareness? Is it lower funnel for people that are already looking for what you're doing? And so how you attribute paid media and how you calculate your return on investment depends on your paid media strategy, your clarity around building audiences, and actually making sure you've got visibility through the customer journey to be able to leverage each channel and each type of audience and campaign structures in the best way for your business. We could do, and we will do, an entire webinar on this, because it's something we're good at and we're passionate about. But this is understanding full funnel and the roles and different ways in which you can leverage paid channels is a whole subject. But in terms of this marketing tech and thinking about different tech and platforms, it's still a similar case of how are we currently performing and how we validate our assumptions. So many assumptions. How do we validate? How do we have fun with it? And how do we create a culture that's hungry to test and to measure and learn? I think that's the real question. And so I've already kind of just given a couple of mini examples around how do we soundly validate this? What is our bias here? And that really is the outcome of getting this, getting a strong ROI from a tech case, is validating as many of your assumptions as you can. But there's probably another, as I think aloud, is actually also thinking about the time frame. Because I know that, for example, a CRM marketing automation type investment is typically a long play. And if you don't have that functionality within your business, you're not going to be able to scale. You're not going to be able to grow without those platforms or that tech in the back end. This is also where, again, it's a really interesting time with AI and what is possible. And the way tech stacks can be changing is a really interesting one. This is one we're doing internally at Data Story, where I'm going, how do I have a tech stack that I can use AI to work on? Because the companies and the organizations that have a tech stack that AI can operate in will soon have a hugely unfair advantage because of the speed with which they can operate. Like I said, today I rebuilt the Data Story website in a couple of hours with a handful of prompts. including like a login client area calculator. It's like mind-bogglingly fast, and yeah, it's not perfect. But if I can then take that code and use AI to work on it, then all of a sudden I'm going, wow, this is allowing us to run when the alternative becomes so slow in comparison. So lastly, I want to talk about right sizing the work. So let's just zoom out for a second. Yeah. Let's just zoom out for a second. And I want you to really just think critically about your business. So let's just say you've got this business case data. You've actually been tracking this data along over time. You can see the trend lines of some of these core metrics. You're confident in investing of like what you need to play in. But I think one of the most underrated conversations in strategy is this prioritization space. And I think one of the best ways to prioritize actually where you play is to think about right sizing the work. So this is a really simple slide I made earlier, but for some of your organizations, areas of your marketing, it's really important that you be iterative. And this might, let me try and emphasize this. We've worked with a number of clients where they start making these massive, big sweeping changes to pricing strategy, to product strategy, and without the data kind of backend. And then when you go to understand what's working, what's not, because of the lag in the kind of the sales time, or like, lag in kind of like time to purchase, we're making changes so quickly that we don't know what's working. And marketing feels like this chaos shotgun approach where there's no actual structure around test, measure, learn. So having the structure and kind of going, hey, this is working relatively well. How do we optimize this? How do we test more ad variations? How do we test different targeting? How do we tweak this landing page? How do we, this is real optimization base. Then we move into this kind of substantial space. Potentially some of your organizations, iterating your ad accounts is a waste of time. You need an overhaul. That being said, there's always a process to do this safely, to not kill performance, but there's at a certain point, it's actually the structure that's going to drive the results. Testing out new channels, this proof of concept around certain marketing tech of going, we're not going to fully integrate it, but we're going to just set up on a trial and we're going to just run this for a bit and see if we can actually validate our assumptions. New forms of social proof, new automations. This is looking at the business going, we really need to just ramp this up, all the way to getting disruptive. For some of your organizations, you might need to hear this. The horse is dead. Dismount. You're currently putting money into a marketing program that is not performing, and I'm sorry, you need to look at the data. There's not really a correlation to performance. You need to kill it. Some of you might need to hear that today. At the other end of that is going, we just need it. The market is shifting. We need a new product. We need to actually look at the positioning of our organization. Again, optimizing pricing, so underrated in terms of what it can do for margin. We need to actually just look at scaling. Sometimes you have a chat with someone who's on a different level and it blows your mind. And what I mean by this is you look at your business and you think it's perform. And this is one of the privileges we have with working with so many different organizations, where someone's looking at their business thinking they're scratching the roof of a glass ceiling, and they're like, there might be a client doing literally 10 times the volume that you're doing. And all of a sudden you need to lift your gaze up and actually see what's possible and realize that you've got a constraint on delivery. You need to resource it to grow. You need to put the money in, the opportunities there. This is strategy, and really thinking about this. Do we need to test, or do we need to test a whole new product? This is really scary, exciting stuff that matters. And so you might be asking, how do I do that? The single most important element as a marketing leader is the vision that you have for your marketing team and your organization. If we sit down with an organization and they're not clear about where they want to go, you can almost guarantee that they will not get to where they're not clear about going. Versus when you sit down with a marketing leader that knows where they're going, that is the single most consistent factor in performance, is a clear vision. And within that vision, you should be able to set a target. This is a fantastic visual that we're starting to roll out with all of our clients. Unfortunately, we've had to gray out actually what's going on here for obvious reasons. But the idea of this visual is this data's lagging. But this blue line, which is our actual, like in this particular case, we're ahead of target, well, in April, we were substantially ahead of target. But if this blue line starts to drag behind where we want to be, so if you're saying, cool, we want to double our revenue in the next 12 months, and then you set that target, you graph it in that spreadsheet, and then you set your target of what we need to do to reasonably be there. And yeah, you can lag behind, have a big update and spike up. But if that lag starts getting too high, this is where you need to actually start thinking about being more disruptive. And so a lot of marketing strategy comes down to a really simple data visualization like this. We need to look at this and go, hey, what we're doing, if we're this far behind, optimizing an ad set is not going to get us there. You need to actually, this is real deal strategy stuff. And this is where we need to potentially, some of us as marketing leaders need to be thinking about. Some of you might be like, this is super obvious. I know all this. And for some of you might be thinking, wow, we got some exciting work to do in this space. I want to invite you. We've got the spreadsheet template. Flick Studio at an email or flick me an email, make a copy. We've got a tourism version. We're working on other industries that we work in. We typically specialize in life cycle based marketing. So say, for example, a home loan, it's only relevant at certain points in your life. Tourism, only relevant, etc. And so this is part of how we're doing this. Like I said, we actually have automated this now, but I think the spreadsheet is a great place to start. And what I want you to think about now as we wrap this up here is, what's your one takeaway action? And I'd really love it if you pop it in the chat. And the reason I say this is because you've given up your time, which is super valuable to be here. And if you don't take action, we're not utilizing your time well. So I want you to take the time now and think, if I do just one thing, what would it be? What would the domino be to actually bring results, to actually and so if you're brave enough, I invite you to pop it in the chat. But I also block out your calendar, send the email, take the action now, because I guarantee Wednesday morning you roll around, work will get busy, and soon we like to say business as usual is the enemy of growth. It's the enemy of innovation, and we're all busy. And so the fact that you've taken this time, I'm like, just take that little bit more time, take that action, and let's kick some marketing butt. Wow, that was not a good ending.